Shalom Aleichem, welcome one and all. Last two final days of the holy month of Cheshvan. We are on the 29th of Cheshvan, and wishing everybody, tonight we begin a new month, the beginning of the new month, the month of Kislev, 5779, Holy Apple, Holy Wednesdays. This is part 2 on the massacre in Pittsburgh, a Jewish wake-up call. I just wanted to say that unfortunately there's so much of this discussion about what happened in Pittsburgh, and there's so much stuff out there. But let me tell you, and this is from the grace of God, that I'm really frightened by so much of the stuff that I hear. Of course, there's a minority of stuff that you hear that, of course, are good things, are positive. They are lessons that we should all learn. You know, when we hear a class about the fact that we have to strengthen the observance of Shabbat or the speech, gossip, of course those are all positive things. Those are great things to do. Those will definitely help us. But we have to understand, you know, I've looked at a lot of this stuff out there, and thank God that you're with us over here, because on both sides of the spectrums, not just one side, on both sides of the spectrums, there are people that are really out there and exaggerating on a negative outlook towards the people in Pittsburgh, the community in Pittsburgh. There are people that are on the opposite spectrum that have the greatest, praises for them, and we're all one and we're all united. Both sides, what I've seen, I hate to say this, but it's really frightening, because listening to a lot of this talk myself, and then looking up the sources, you know how many times today you see there is no connection between the illustration and the news story? You know those disclaimers? So there is no connection between the sources and what really those sources, what was said in the class, and the sources looking at them. There's absolutely no connection. This to me was very, very frightening. Some of the people out there, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. They perhaps made a few overlooks. Maybe they didn't, I'm sure they're pressed for time, so they didn't have a chance to really go over a few times the sources. I'm going to give some of them the benefit of the doubt, because I know that there's a lot of righteous people out there that spoke on the subject. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Some people, not going to give the benefit of the doubt. Some people really have an agenda out there, and they're quoting different sources, either by not giving where the sources are, or when you look at the sources, you see something exactly the opposite or not what they mention. So to me, that's very frightening, because I'm of the school that before you open up your mouth, you better check many, many times before you say something. If Rabbi Akiva tells us that before a person stands up to give a Dvar Torah, you better go over it a few times, or if you're reading the Torah, you better go over it. That's the law. That's the Jewish law. And it's sad to see that there's a lot of information out there that people don't have the ability to look into it, to delve into it further, and to see what really says. what it really says. And that to me is another tragedy. Within the Pittsburgh tragedy, we have many tragedies. Okay, so we spoke about our basic 3 subjects that we want to hit on. Number 1 is anti-Semitism in America, in the world. Number 2 was the fact this attack took place in Pittsburgh. There was, in 1885, for 3 days, there was a convention in Pittsburgh where a group of so-called rabbis got together and put in what they called a Pittsburgh platform. And this had influence on different communities, one of them being the community of the Tree of Life. So the Tree of Life, they've been out there. They've been in business for 154 years or so. They were influenced by this Isaac Mayer Weiss. His name really was Weiss, but then when he came to America from Bohemia, he changed it to so it would sound more like American. He changed it to Wise, as like in a wise man, instead of Weiss or Weiss. So the connection between the Reform Conservative, the Pittsburgh platform. Why did the worst ever anti-Semitic incident in America's history, why did it happen in this area? Is there something for us to learn about the connection, Reform Conservative, Pittsburgh platform? Number 3, these poor Jews that were murdered, are they considered to be holy martyrs? Yes, no, maybe different opinions. Okay, of course, it goes without saying, of course, that our hearts go out to the families and the friends of those Jews that were murdered, and of course, we wish them comfort, the families and the friends, and of course these words that we will say today will be Lilui Nishmatam, which means that those Jews that were murdered by this anti-Semite, these words of Torah, these lessons, that hopefully we will be able, with God's help, to pass over to one and all, to ourselves and to everyone else. This will be an elevation for their souls. And of course, last but not least, of course, it says in the words of our sages that when a Jew is murdered by a non-Jew, then God puts, so to speak, a stain of blood on a certain garment that Hashem goes around with. Of course, God doesn't have any garments, just so to speak, and they will always be remembered. And eventually, God will avenge their blood and the descendants, because when people are taken away from this world, so therefore there is not just them, it's their relatives or those that would have come after them. So it's something that keeps on going for history. Okay, with all that said and done, let's start right away. Anti-Semitism, time to go home, wake-up call. We don't hear about this a lot. We hear about a lot of things, improving love for Jews, all true, all good. Do we all have something to improve? Are we all responsible? Yes, we're all responsible. Some more, some less, yes. Okay, so let's look at various statistics and events that have occurred since we last were here. Amazing. Number 1, statistics. According to the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, in the year 2013, there were in America 751 anti-Semitic incidents. A year later, in 2014, it went up to from 751 to 912. In 2015, it went up only a little. It went up from 912 to 1941 anti-Semitic incidents. In the year 2016, it jumped from 1941 to 1,267. Listen to this. This past year, it jumped from 1,267 incidents to 1,986 cases of anti-Semitism. Amazing, as we spoke about last week, 57% spike on anti-Semitism. Those are the numbers. We could see in the last 4 or 5 years, you could smell the coffee. You could see the handwriting on the wall. Wake up. Let us all wake up. Let's go over a few that I was able to, or people sent me, that I was able to write down. Number one, back in my old hometown, Irvine, California. I'm from LA, but Irvine not too far away. Graffiti on the Beth Jacob synagogue saying F the Jews. F the Jews. Okay. A Brooklyn synagogue defaced, vandalized, swastikas on the walls, the slogan "Kill Jews" on a Brooklyn synagogue. Next, arson in Williamsburg. Okay, arson in Williamsburg. Number 5, Long Beach, New York. 3 yeshiva boys were walking down the street. A car pulled up. One fellow pulled out a BB gun and shot the 3 boys. Spring Valley, a Jewish man was assaulted, was beaten, and also another person in that car screamed out, "This is not Jewland. This is not Jewland." Central Las Vegas. Central Las Vegas, I guess no jackpots over there, pardon the pun, but in the past week, less than a week actually, there were 2 attacks in 1 week in Central Las Vegas. Number 1, person that they mistaken for being Jewish, guy happened to be not Jewish, swastikas on his house and on his garage. Central Las Vegas. Number 2, a woman named Sarah Atiyah, who claims that she's a proud Jew, but she's not, ultra-Orthodox Jew. She had on her door of her house, it was painted there, "Hail Hitler, may his memory be erased," on the door, and a swastika. Here's what she had to say when she got up and she saw this. She was panicking, she was shaking, she couldn't breathe. That's pretty serious. You can't breathe, shaking, panicking. One might think that maybe I should move or leave. Hey, she says, this is not the Holocaust. It's not going to happen. Amazing. It's not going to happen. Just like we heard last week by Jeffrey Myers from the Tree of Life synagogue, temple, whatever you want to call it, in Pittsburgh, we're not leaving, we're going to build. We're going to build up here. Yeah. Okay, so that's the message of Sarah Tia, that, it's not the Holocaust, and I'm not going to move, I'm not going to leave. But she is panicky, she was shaking, she couldn't breathe, and it's something that she says will always be with her, but she ain't leaving. In the prayer book of Rav Yaakov Emden, one of the leading sages some hundreds of years ago, in his before his commentary on the prayer book, there's something called the Ladder of Beit El, the Ladder of Beit El. On the 13th and 14th page, there's an amazing thing that the rabbi wrote, and everyone out there, especially if you're outside of the land of Israel, listen closely to his words, because they are pretty prophetic. Here's what he says. he brings down the Talmud, Rav Yaakov Emden, the Tractate of Idol Worshipping, page 8. It says that the Jewish people that live outside the land of Israel are worshipping idols via purity, as if they're worshipping idols, but they are worshipping them through purity. And then he goes on to say, never think to settle outside the land of Israel, God forbid. And this was the sin of our forefathers thousands of years ago, when they despised the land of Israel and they wanted to stay in the desert. And the Torah teaches us that the words that King David uses in Psalms, Vayimasu be'eretz chemda, they despised the God's chosen land. He says the following. He says, how you doing, bro? It's good to see good Jews. So Rav Emden goes on to say that we have, like someone that has died, we have forgotten the land of Israel. We have forgotten the land of Israel totally. That's what he says. How many people awaken themselves? How many people really think about the land of Israel? He says maybe 1 out of 1,000 people awaken themselves to go there, to settle there. 1 in 1,000 maybe think about it and eventually go there. And then he goes on. One from a state, and maybe 2 in a generation. That's how many people are willing to come here. No one, we are losing track, and we don't realize that we have forgotten the land of Israel. We have forgotten to keep it on our hearts and keep it in our minds, in our spirits, and in our actions. And because we have forgotten the land of Israel, then we have become accustomed to a secure life outside the land of Israel. We have found another land of Israel here. We have outside the land of Israel. We have found another Jerusalem. And listen to these words and never forget them. Carve them on your souls and your hearts. Rav Emden writes, because of the fact that we've forgotten Jerusalem and we've forgotten the land of Israel, and there's maybe 1 person out of 1,000 that's willing to come here, or one from a state is willing to come to the land of Israel, to move here. Because of this, Al kein ba'u aleinu kol haraot b'shevet Yisrael. Because of this, all bad things have happened to us outside the land of Israel. All these terrible tragedies and massacres and calamities have happened, have befallen us because of the fact that we have found the land of Israel outside the land of Israel. We have found another Jerusalem. It's an amazing statement. We're looking for Shabbos. Oh, it must be Shabbos. It must be evil gossip. That's what has fallen upon us. That's why we're suffering. And all these classes that I mentioned, that you could find them by the hundreds, like mushrooms after a rain. All these classes about the tragedy in Pittsburgh and how to improve ourselves. Of course, we must improve ourselves. Those are true ideas. But Rav Emden, he just hits it out of the park. And he tells us the main reason why we are suffering. And he brings in the reason why we, in the land of Spain and also in other countries. Amazing thing. All of the tragedies that have befallen the Jewish people, it's because we've forgotten the land of Israel and we've forgotten Jerusalem, and there are only a minority that are willing to come up and embrace the land. And then he goes on. And then he says the following. He says, many times you ask people why they don't go. And they say, listen, because of the fact that we're poor people and we don't have the resources to go there. And the land of Israel is very, very far from where we live, from the country that we live. And so therefore, are we supposed to get on some kind of a wagon, or are we supposed to take some kind of raft to, I mean, in those days, you know, to get to the land of Israel, it was you have to go into some wagon, you have to go on some raft. He doesn't even use the word boat. And then he tells an amazing slap in the face for all of us. He says, that's very interesting. The reason why we're not coming to the land of Israel, we're not going up. The reason why we've forgotten the land of Israel, it's so far away, it's so hard to get there. Those are the days before, you know, you get on a plane and a couple of hours later, if you're in New York, 10 hours later, or California, 14 hours later. And those were the days, you know. And he says the following. He says, this is no answer. Why? Because of the fact that we see with our own eyes. And he brings different sources that have mentioned this. For a person's sustenance, for a person's livelihood, boy, are they willing to put themselves in dangers. Boy, are they willing to travel through various, you know, bad neighborhoods. They're willing to go through them bad neighborhoods. They're willing to put themselves on the line. They go through, they pass over the deserts. They go through to make money. Man, they'll go through they'll put themselves in a lot of dangers. So for money, for a livelihood, we're willing to put ourselves, we're willing to make such an effort and put ourselves in all kinds of dangers. But when it comes to the land of Israel, we are not willing to put ourselves in the same boat, pardon the pun. Now today, it's not even so. It's not even our reality today. I know people that came to the land of Israel, in the last couple of years. They are living on a much higher standard here in the land of Israel than they were in America. It's good to see good Jews. So that's why Rabbi Emden, he just like gives, you know, one of those gongs or crosses out that kind of excuse that we don't have the money, we don't have the resources. I have a friend that is, I have one available space. I'm not going to go into details why I have an available space, because one of my learning partners decided to leave Elon Moreh and head south to the Holy Apple. So I have one learning space which I've brought a Jew that just, with his wife, he just made Aliyah to Elon Moreh, straight from New York, came to Elon Moreh, and he works on his computer. He has a job, and he gets up, you know, he was working on the hours of America, 7 hours behind or whatever, and that's how he does it. You know, and there's a lot of people like that out there. So they have a different schedule than most of us. You know, they're up at very holy hours of the day. I wish I was up at those hours of the days. You know, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. Those are really holy hours, and we could really be up at that time. So, folks, those, you know, the days of struggling, the days of, you know, our parents told us where there were no vegetables here, or, you know, people once a week you were out to buy milk. Those days are long gone. Okay, so that's no excuse. Okay, moving right along here. Anti-Semitism. Yeah, we saw those incidents. How exactly does it go down? How does it happen? Why do we see a 57% increase in the last year in anti-Semitic incidents? We see almost every single day that goes by incidents. Once again, I just gave a list of 7 or 8 incidents there in less than a week. Okay? And how many things that we do not know about. So how does anti-Semitism, how does it exactly happen? This is an amazing lesson for all of us here. How does God sort of turn the tables, and the anti-Semites come out of their cracks, and they come out in public, and they're no longer fearful, and the attack, and there's like a change. There's a change. There's an amazing poll yesterday, Too bad I wasn't able to get it. I didn't have enough time. But 51% of Americans polled do not believe, do not believe in democracy, who do not believe in the fact that America is a democracy. That's a frightening thing. 51% do not believe in democracy. Okay, so how does God play the card, so to speak, to wake up these anti-Semites? Everything was calm, cool, collective, and all of a sudden, like one day, what changed? What happened? What did we do? The Jewish people, we are the only ones that move anything in this world. If there's some kind of tragedy, it's because of the Jewish people, to learn something from it. It's because we're not who we are supposed to be. So how does this happen? So our first source here is our sages in Shmot Rabbah, 1-8. It says that in Egypt that there was a new pharaoh that came up to power, and from there on things got bad. So what caused this change? So listen to the words of our sages. The rabbis open in the following verse. It's a verse in the prophet called Hosea, chapter 5, verse 7. It says, Ba'ashem bagadu, that the Jewish people have betrayed God. Thank you, Ephraim. They betrayed God. Now, how do we do that? How did a Jew betray God? And the rabbis go on further to explain how that happened. To teach us that when Joseph passed away, the Jewish people began to annul and stop performing circumcision. And they said, let's be like the Egyptians. And because of the fact that they said this and they stopped, they wanted to look like the Egyptians. They wanted to look like the Egyptians. Because of this, listen to the words, because of the fact that they wanted to be like the Egyptians, God took the love that the Egyptians had for the Jewish people, the love that up until then there was a love for the Jewish people. God changed the love into hatred. And all of a sudden that beautiful face of love turned into a frightening face of anti-Semitism, and the rest is history. What happened to the Jewish people in Egypt? 10,000 babies thrown in the Nile. Jews killed, Jews murdered, Jews subjugated to slavery. That's how it happened. But we have an even deeper explanation by the Netziv. Naftali Tzvi Yehuda, the Netziv of Berlin, he has, it's not known to many, but he has, besides for his commentary on the 5 books of Moses, there's a very small volume on the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim. And in the end of that volume on Shir HaShirim, the song written by Solomon, he asks the question, where does anti-Semitism come from? He uses those words, where does anti-Semitism come from? Listen to what he says, amazing thing. On page 115, it's called She'er Yisrael, the remainder of the Jews. He says the following, you have to know this, that the love that the nations show and show us, even if it will continue for days or many years, however, you should know that this love for the Jewish people will not continue. It will not be steady. And in every single generation, there's no exceptions to the rule. You think you're in America, you're going to hide behind Uncle Sam? Ain't going to work. In every generation that things look positive and good, and the hatred, the haters, you cannot find them. They're somewhere hiding. It's not popular. As Rabbi Kahana mentioned, that after the Holocaust, people hated Jews, but they hated them quietly, silently, because it wasn't popular to hate Jews back then. Those days are long gone. So even though the hatred against the Jews, it's there, it's out there, but it's hidden. And this hatred is ready to be released upon the Jewish people at any moment. Any moment. When God sees that the time is right. So the Netziv here, the rabbi here, he gives us an amazing line here. No matter where you are in the world, okay, wherever you are outside the land of Israel, because inside the land of Israel we have a promise that there will be not another exile. This is the safest place. We're not going to go into it right now. There are many, many sources to this. But outside the land of Israel, in every single generation, the anti-Semites are there. Even though you might not hear about them, you might not see them, they are out there. And when we do certain things, that releases them. God gives them the green light and they're out. And it's frightening. What's that? What's the green light? What gives the Gentiles a hold over the Jewish people? What releases the anti-Semites from their handcuffs? Listen to this. When Jacob, this is the Netziv, he continues on page 116 now. He says the following: when Jacob went down to Egypt, Pharaoh was happy to allow Jacob to live in any of the communities where the Egyptians lived. But that's not what Jacob wanted to do. He did not want to be a citizen of the Egyptian country. He wanted to be what God said. God said to Abraham, God told Abraham that your children will be in 4 or 5 or 8, okay, depending on which sources that we bring out. Some of the exiles, as we mentioned in the past, are double exiles. We are right now in a double whammy. We're in the exile of the Islam and we're in the exile of the Christian world in one shot, of Edom and of Ishmael. So anyways, there's different sources how many. But God told that your children for generations, for almost all of history, they will be strangers. And he uses the word strangers. And this comes up over and over again. We spoke about this last week. When the Jew feels comfortable, in the name of Rav Meir Simcha of Dvinsk, the Meshech Chochmah, when a Jew begins to feel comfortable, when he feels like America or Europe or Germany or Poland, or you just fill in the blanks, becomes home. When Jews begin to sing God Bless America, in the 7th inning of a Boston Red Sox New York Mets game, a Hasidic guy with payas and a beard, you know we're in trouble. So listen to this. God told the secret to Jacob. You want to make it? You want to be successful? You want to stay safe? Alive? You remember that one? Staying alive? Staying alive? I guess that was before your time. So, what happened? So Jacob took that advice that God said to Abraham. He took it seriously. I am not going to be a citizen of Egypt. I am going to be a stranger in Egypt. I have to do my time. I'm going to be a stranger here. And he chose to live in a place where there were no Egyptians. He chose a place that was called Goshen. It's called Goshen. And it was originally given to the Jewish people by Pharaoh to Sarah. When Sarah was kidnapped by the Egyptians way back, so it was given to her as a present by the king of Egypt, that area. So therefore, as long as the Jewish people lived alone and separately and did not assimilate within the Egyptian culture, everything was fine. And it says here an amazing thing, that as long as Joseph lived, no Jew was allowed, even if they wanted to, no Jew was allowed to move to Goshen. Amazing thing. Even if you wanted to. No Jew was allowed. You're here, and that's where we stay. And that's how we stay alive here. But then what happens? Joseph dies. Joseph dies, and then the Jewish people sees in performing the commandment of circumcision and other ideas which we spoke about once. Check out the class. We spoke about the frightening similarities between the Egyptian and American exile. There were other acts that the Jews in Egypt tried to copy, the dress and hairstyles, etc., of the Egyptians. Okay, so what happens? Joseph dies, and now the Jewish people are free. Now there's no one telling them that they can't leave the ghetto of Goshen. So what do the Jewish people, instead of remaining alone and separated from the nations of the world, they start filling, as it says in the Torah, they started filling the streets and the communities and the cities and the suburbs of Egypt. And until the entire Egypt was full of Jews all over their cities. And they began, this is the words of the Netziv, and the Netziv writes that they began to learn and they began to assimilate and become equal to equal rights, become equal to the Egyptians. And this is amazing. So as soon as Joseph passed away, that's why there was a change. Because Joseph, he ruled over the Jewish people, and he made it clear that no one's moving out of here. But as soon as he was dead, soon he was gone, that was it. And the Jewish people flocked in numbers, in the multitudes, down to the Egyptian cities. So therefore, God changed the love that the Egyptians had, and it changed into hate. So we see here, these are the ingredients. What happens is, anti-Semitism is always out there. Many times it's silenced, many times people have a good economy and they're quiet, but eventually, okay, the Jewish people begin to forget that we are not residents, we are not citizens, we are strangers, we do not belong here. We do not feel like we belong here. We belong in the land of Israel. Once the Jewish people melt and begin assimilating, God, this is how it works every single time. Once that happens, then God changes the love that the population had wherever we might be dispersed in the exile. God changes that love to hate. And therefore, that's how we have anti-Semitism. This is the rabbi explaining how anti-Semitism comes into play. It comes into play when Jews think that they're smart. When the Jew thinks that if they assimilate and they dress and they talk and they speak and they act and they socialize with the Gentiles, this will bring the love of the Gentiles upon the Jews. The irony of the whole thing is exactly the opposite. Those that assimilate, those are the ones that bring Pittsburgh on Pittsburgh. Those are the ones that bring the Holocaust on Germany. Those that assimilate. Why do religious pay? Because that's the way it works. When we're in the same boat, okay, when you're in the same boat and you have one idiot that's making a hole in the boat, everyone's going down. Everyone's going down. And everyone, of course, religious people, they have their own issues. Are they responsible? Yes, they have their own issues. But this is hardball here. We're talking about here, this is the major. There's a lot of little subtitles to why we're suffering. But this is the major thing. When the Jewish people begin to assimilate and melt and become equal and become citizens and look at themselves as part of that country that they're in. So, who has helped us? Who has helped us more than other to assimilate? Whose whose principles are to assimilate and become more like the Gentiles. An amazing book by Rabbi Kahana, YB Jewish. This book saved my life. Maybe it will save yours. When I finished this book, I came to two conclusions in my personal life. Number one, that I had to repent. And number two, I had to move and come to the land of Israel from this book. This is an amazing book. This is before internet. Amazing how he was able to get, the rabbi was able to get all the sources. Everything is documented. In fact, I ran into this book about the Pittsburgh platform, and it's word for word. Now, I got it off easily. You know, you just put in Rabbi Google today, and you're flying. But this is an amazing book. And the book, basically, the rabbi explains and he shows not millions, but thousands of sources between the Reform and conservative movements, how they were the ones that destroyed the soul of the Jewish people. So I'm going to read a couple of lines from the rabbi. The Jewish establishment, this is on page 34. The Jewish establishment devotes huge amounts of time, money, and energy to find the answer. Why do Jews assimilate and intermarry and leave the fold? That's the question. The puzzled shepherds of the American Jewish community can close down their study groups and their commissions and their committees. Wow, this is great. They can put an end to the learned and expensive surveys. They can stop spending Jewish communal funds. What makes Bernie run away from Judaism? Who created the Bernie who runs after a non-Jew? Or who marches for Jesus or Trotsky or Arafat or for nothing Jewish? Who created Bernie who finds Judaism as unimportant as the color of his hair? Why, the answer is obvious. The very same establishment groups who are busily creating the committees, commissions, study groups, surveys, to find the answers to these questions. Who made Bernie run away from Judaism? The American Jewish Committee, the American Jewish Congress, B'nai B'rith, Federation, on every level, in every locality, the rabbis, the temple rabbis, and most of all, his parents. All of these are criminals. All of these had a hand in the murdering of Bernie as a Jew. All of them robbed him of his heritage, of the beauties of his inheritance. All of these people made Bernie run. It was all the spokesmen for the American Jewish community, the ruling clique, uninformally marching down the American road with a melting pot under their arms, beating over and over again and shouting forth to the American Jew the mighty 11th commandment, "Thou shalt melt." It's an amazing thing here. You look out. I remember once having a conversation with a dear friend rabbi of mine when he, on his yearly visits to the land of Israel. I asked him, I said, Rabbi, how do you deal? You know, you're surrounded in Los Angeles, you're surrounded by conservative and reform. How do you deal with that? He says, let me tell you, Yehuda, I don't have to deal with it because they're a dying show. They're a fizzling out act. They themselves have destroyed, they have committed suicide themselves. I don't have to do anything. That was his response. So, tremendous when we think about how many Jews have been lost. How many millions of Jews have been lost. We bring the statistics every so often. Assimilation in America, those that are married, those of Jews of no affiliation. And all these organizations, all these groups, the Reform, the Conservative, as we saw in the Netziv, All of them are responsible for the death of the soul of the Jew. And once we have destroyed the soul of the Jew, and we assimilate and we melted, it's only a matter of time, as we've seen here, that the love of the Gentiles, of the nations, of the countries, turn into anti-Semitism. It's only a matter of time. That's how it works. You melt, you disappear, you become one with the nations, you become the same. And then God turns the love into a hatred. It's an amazing story here. Listen to this. In Deuteronomy 23:4, it says that if there are converts from the nations of Ammon and Moab, if they convert, they are not allowed to marry Jewish women forever. They would have to marry converts as themselves, or somebody that was a bastard, a mamzeret. So the nation of Ammon and Moab, they are, even after they convert, they are not allowed to marry within the original Jewish caste of people. Next, we go on here. And then we say that if you have any converts that are Egyptians, or if you have converts that are from the nation of Edom, they must wait for the third generation. They're considered to be the first generation. Their children are second generation. Their grandchildren would be able to marry within the Jewish people. So it's very unusual here, folks. So Chazal, our sages, ask a tremendous question. What in the world is going on over here? Why is Ammon and Moab, the nations of Ammon and Moab, they are not allowed to marry within the Jewish people, the original Jewish people, forever, where we have nations like Egypt that drowned 10,000 Jewish babies, that killed numerous amounts of Jews over the 210-year period of time where we were in Egypt. And they get off scot-free. They just have to wait 3 generations. And look at Edom. Look at the Edom, the brother of Jacob. Look at all the terrible things. Even in the desert, they came after us. They pulled out their swords. They wanted to kill us. Look in the Torah. Read all the stories in the prophets. Look till this very day. They're allowed after third generation? I don't understand. If somebody came up to me and told me that there's these murderers, there's these murderers from the nations of Egypt and from the nations of Edom, and on the other hand, you have the nations of Ammon and Moab, what did they do? So the Torah teaches us, what did they do? They caused the Jewish people to sin. So what? These are murderers. These are bad guys. These people, okay, you know. They caused the Jewish people to sin, Ammon and Moab. So listen to this unbelievable Jewish principle in life. So on this verse, our sages in the Sifri say the following. They ask the question, these people killed. How come they're allowed? To teach us that it's a far bigger crime to cause another Jew to sin than even murdering someone. To bring a Jew down, to cause a Jew to sin, to bring a Jew further away from God is much graver than a person that kills. And goes on. Why? Because if a person is killed, he still has the eternal world. He's here. Every one of us here are here for a short amount of time. We're here, some people are here for a couple of days, some people are here for a couple of weeks, months, years, even the greatest of the greatest, 70, 80, 90, 100 years. And then we're out of here. But there's the life of eternity. And a person that was murdered, he goes and he lives for the eternal life. This is just temporary here. It's a temporary stop. But those that leave the fold, They're gone. They're gone from this world, and they're gone from the next world. So there is nothing. This is an amazing concept. And this, if we knew who these nations were today, this is a Jewish law. It's an amazing thing. That's an amazing lesson. It is better to murder somebody than cause somebody to sin. Amazing thing. Glad that everyone's still sitting on a chair here. We haven't fallen off our chairs, gone through the screens here, whatever we have it. This week's Parsha, this week's portion, there's an amazing Rav Yonatan Eifshitz. There's an amazing Rav Yonatan Eifshitz. If we spoke about Rav Yaakov Emden, how are we not going to bring in Rav Yonatan Eifshitz in the same class? On his commentary to the Torah, this week's portion, page 61, he asks a great question. Every mother that's pregnant, there's a lot of movement going on in her womb, in her stomach. So how come not every woman is going and asking their local rabbis, hey, listen, I don't understand what's going on. What brought her? What upset her? Rivka, what upset her? She was pregnant. Eventually would come out Isaac, and eventually would come out Jacob and Esav. So she goes to the leading rabbi, you know, not your local rabbi. She goes to the leading rabbi, the top honcho. And she says, listen, I've had these. So Rav Yonatan Eifshitz says an amazing Torah here. She was certain that she had one child. That this is the pre-ultrasound days, you know, where the doctors could tell you, most of the time they're correct, not always. They could tell you what the sex of the baby is. So she was certain that she had one child. And what was bothering her? That when she would pass houses of Torah, then she would feel a lot of movement in her stomach. When she would pass houses of idol worshiping, she would feel also a lot of kicking going on. So listen to this unbelievable Rav Yonatan Eifshitz. He says the following: what bothered her was that she felt that this was the same child. And she did not want to have any part of a child that is sort of split. He's a little bit of this. I remember when I was a kid, there was a song, I'm a little bit country, I'm a little bit rock and roll, you know? So she was afraid that she had a child who was somewhere, he's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And that is the worst of all. Because if somebody is worshiping idols, they could be saved. They could be saved. But if somebody if somebody is on both ideologies, you know, they're practicing Judaism, they do a few things Jewish, and they do many things that Gentiles do, there is almost no hope for such a person. That is what she was worried. And to bring this home further, we don't even realize it. If we read the prophets, in the book of Kings, book 1, chapter 17, I think it's verse 17, there's an amazing line that we're sleeping. We don't realize it. Elijah the prophet comes out to the Jewish people and he says, listen guys, that's enough. It's enough. You guys, you're worshiping God and you're worshiping idols, a little bit of Judaism, a little bit of non-Jewish stuff. You know, this has come to an end. You have to decide who you are. And he says the following. He looks to the Jewish people and he tells them that these days are over. You have to make a choice here. Are you Jewish 100%? Or are you with the idol worshippers 100%? Are you with the nations? Are you with the Jewish people? So listen to what he says. Elijah the prophet looks at them straight in the eye and says, listen, if you choose to go in the path of the idol worshipping, you're welcome to go right now. Take your side. Elijah, what's going on? You're letting Jews go to the other side, to the idol worshippers, to the nations? You're not going to try to save them? when a Jew is confused, when a Jew is a shatnez, he's a mix of Judaism, Americanism, all kinds of stuff. This is the worst. This is the worst. And therefore, Elijah the prophet was willing to give a green light, a pass, to thousands of Jews. And he didn't say, listen, it's better if you keep a few of the commandments. It's better if you a little bit, you on Saturday you go to the synagogue and, okay, you do other things, but it's better. He says, out of here. Out of here. Amazing thing. That's what we're talking about here. These movements, the conservative and the reform movements, they're out of here. They are the melters. They destroyed. This is so sad. This is such a tragedy. It's such a tragedy what they did. That how many Jews, I look at my family, I look at other people's families, how many people have they destroyed over the years, last 200 years, with assimilation, to be like a church, the temple. It's called the temple, or it's called synagogue for Greeks. There's some rabbis out there. They might have hats on. I don't. They might have suits on. I gave mine away many years ago. Thank God it was too hot for me with those suits. But listen to the words that he had to say. Listen to this. Remember these words because they're so creepy. They're so... These are the words that a certain rabbi, Orthodox, hat, coat, had to say about the Pittsburgh tragedy and massacre. It's about truth. Yeah, it's about truth. We have to believe that each side is coming with their own truth. You know that the old joke? Somebody comes up and says, "You're right." And another person says the opposite. He said, "You're right." So a third guy comes, says, "How can that be? You said he's right, but he said the opposite, and he said he's right." "You're also right." Everybody's right. Everybody's right. This is beautiful. Everyone and their own truth. Yeah. Okay, I'm quoting. I sat down there and I wrote this out. We have to believe that each side is coming at this with their own truth. On Shabbat morning, they were honoring their truth. They were honoring their truth. Some of them were better than me in expressing their truth. Rabbi, hat, coat. Some of them going to a conservative funeral parlor, synagogue. Some of them were better than me expressing their truth. They were devoted to Hashem, to God. Every one of them is holy and pure. We once had the famous 10 martyrs in the time of the Talmud and the Roman decrees against Judaism, and now we have the 11 martyrs of the holy martyrs of Pittsburgh. In one swoop, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Gamliel, doesn't it, with his hat on, with his coat on, his black suit on, or whatever over there. Put him on the same pedestal, man. Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Gamliel, amazing. Same. Everyone's the same. Same truth. Everyone their own truth. This is the BS that's coming over the net. By the way, a HT. When I first saw that expression on the computer, I thought, being a sports fan, I thought it was a hat trick. HT, hat trick, you know, in hockey, when you have three goals, a player has 3 goals, it's a hat trick. But then I figured it out that it was a hat tip, tipping one's hat. So hat tip goes to Tomer Devora for sending she said, Yehuda, you got to use this for your class next week. And she sent me the clip of the rabbi. Okay. Pittsburgh Platform. The founding document of what has come to be called the classical Reform ideology was the culmination of a meeting of Reform rabbis from November 16th to 19th, 1885, at the Concordia Club in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It explicitly called for a rejection of those laws which have a ritual rather than a moral basis. Judaism turns into ethics. An example of a ritual rejected by the Pittsburgh Platform is kashrut, or the observance of Jewish dietary laws. These ritual laws were seen as detracting from Jewish life in the modern era by placing undue emphasis on ritual rather than ethical considerations. The platform affirms God's existence and recognizes a universal desire in all religions to experience the indwelling of God in man. The platform, Pittsburgh Platform, calls for the recognition of the inherent worth of Christianity and Islam. There is inherent worth in Christianity and Islam, although it still holds that Jerusalem was the highest. Judaism is the highest, but there is still many, many merits to Christianity and Islam. If you were ever thinking about OTD, going off the derech, going off the path. Instead of the nation, Pittsburgh Platform defines Jews in the modern world as religious community with pluralistic nations. We belong to, we're a religion, and we're Americans, we're Europeans, we're French, whatever. There was an explicit rejection of Zionism in the form that maintained that Jews were in exile everywhere except in what is now Israel and should move to Israel as soon as possible. They rejected that one. That version of Zionism was viewed as completely inapplicable to American Jews because they were at home in America. Go on. The Pittsburgh Platform helped shape the future of American Reform Judaism by calling for American Jews not to focus on traditional customs and practices, but instead focus on ethical living and to engage in social justice as taught by the prophets of the Hebrew Bible. Today, this principle is maintained by the Reform movement, among other movements, through their commitment to what is called Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world. One of the leaders happened to be Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise. Listen to this. Pittsburgh Platform. Who did it influence? Let's see. Tree of Life congregation where the massacre took place last week. Pittsburgh was formed in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1864 as a breakaway group from the congregation Rodef Shalom, an Orthodox synagogue founded in 1854, which began adopting Reform practices following the visit of Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise to the city. Okay, so we have one bites the dust. We have a place that it was called Rodef Shalom. It was an Orthodox synagogue. It was an Orthodox community. In comes Isaac Mayer Weiss. We'll call him by his Jewish name, Weiss. In he comes, and he has tremendous influence. And in this synagogue, they decide to adopt a lot of the principles and practices that they heard from this guy Weiss. So what happened is that the Rodef Shalom, even though it was Orthodox at the beginning, they now moved away from that, and now they became either conservative or reform. So one group said, we're not interested in all this reform jive, and that was called the Tree of Life, where took place the attack. Now, the Tree of Life was originally a Orthodox congregation. In early years, the Tree of Life was the city center for Orthodox Judaism and attracted Orthodox Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. But beginning in 1883, it shortened the traditional Orthodox prayer service, and in 1886 became affiliated with the JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary, later on United Synagogues of America, conservative. So we see the poison, the spiritual poison of this guy Weiss, the Pittsburgh platform. There's an Orthodox community, congregation. It's called Rodef Shalom. In comes Weiss. He destroys the place with his spiritual poison. He destroys it. So a group breaks off. These are the righteous ones here. They break off and they create a community, a congregation called Tree of Life. It's an Orthodox community. It's an Orthodox synagogue. But they too were influenced as time went by. It's an amazing thing if you think about it. Why? Because the Talmud, thousands of years ago, tell us something very interesting. That this kind of minute, when you have movements that take you away from God and Judaism, they're very, very attracted. They're very attractive, and they're very, very, they suck you in. You don't even feel it at the beginning. This is an amazing thing. This is a group of people that broke off. They said, we're not willing to share the synagogue with you. If you're going to bring in this so-called rabbi's platform, this Pittsburgh platform, if you want to bring it into our community, we're going to start an Orthodox synagogue. But they also were influenced, and it was only a matter of years where the poison of likes of Weiss come into play and into the heart of the Jewish soul, and then therefore they themselves become, if you look today, not many differences between them or Reform temples, not many differences. So unfortunately today, we have to remind ourselves, because even amongst the religious community, there's definitely this PC, politically correct attitude. And we have to put the cards on the table, unfortunately, because though, of course, God does not give us prophecy why, etc., this attack happens, but we know principles. The Torah, we've talked about principles, how assimilation brings upon anti-Semitism and attacks. We've seen it, okay? So we're not prophets, we're not prophesizing here. Were there other issues here? Very well could be. But there's too much politically correct stuff here. Rabbi Kahana, in his book, Why Be Jewish, on page 66, he says the following: there really are no conservative Jews, only conservative rabbis, and half of these are Orthodox ones who looked for greener pastures. So Rabbi Kahana gives a very interesting ruling here. He says that you have to differentiate between the conservative movement leaders, activists, and the layman, who, in the words of the rabbi, know less than the small amount that their leaders know. So, we've forgotten, we're trying so much to be politically correct that we're not calling a spade and a diamond. And just wanted to go over, with God's help, a few quick things here. Number one, in one of the greatest books in our generation, it's called the Piskei Tshuvot. I've had the merit to meet a few times with the author of the book, Rav Rabinovich from Ramat Shlomo outside of Jerusalem. And he has about 8 books on modern day Jewish law. And he writes in the Laws of Sabbath, listen closely, in the Laws of Sabbath 329 and paragraph 5 says the following: do we desecrate Shabbat to save a person's life? Do we desecrate Shabbat? The answer is, of course, yes. All people? The answer is no. We do not desecrate the Sabbath to save all types of people. Listen closely. It says the following: a Jew that performs many sins, as long as he admits that the Torah is divine and from God, we must desecrate the Sabbath for a person. Imagine that. You have a rabbi, he's a holy guy, he sees somebody on the Sabbath going into a movie, going to a sports game, going into a restaurant, and then the guy, he's having a heart attack on the street. He goes over there. He doesn't give a damn whether the guy has a kippah on or not has a kippah on. As long as this person, no matter how many sins he has, but he believes in the foundation. We spoke last week, the important Maimonides, Rambam, who explains the difference between Jews that do millions of sins but believe in the principles of Torah, than a person that does many commandments but does not believe in the principles. There are 2 separate camps. One is inside the ballpark. One has been tossed out of the ballpark. So he says that kind of person, yes. But if he does this, if a person transgresses commandments in order to make others angry, he wants to incite others. Oh, look at me. Look what I'm doing. I want to put it into your face. I want to put it in your face. Such a person, we do not desecrate the Sabbath for such a person that's doing it to be spiteful. And then he goes on, and he talks about, in our times, do we have a law? Is there a law that in the Talmud, in the Tractate of Shabbat, there's a law that talks about a child, a baby, that was kidnapped when they were a little kid, and they were brought into family or into slavery, whatever. They were kidnapped, and they never knew they were Jewish. So the question is, in our times, does that apply? Today, anybody that's interested, you can join classes. Today there are more Jewish yeshivot, study halls, than there were ever in the history of the Jewish people. And today you could go online. Today you could watch on YouTube. You could spend your entire life studying Torah. Today it's right out there. Religious people are visible. You see them. Okay, there's a question. There's different opinions on that subject. It's not our subject for today. Anyways, he says the following, that if a person is considered to be even though there's different opinions, there's some opinion that say that today we do not have the law, especially in Israel, in the land of Israel, we do not have the law of a child, a baby that was kidnapped, because today everything is out in your face, everything is public. If you're interested, ask a question. So even so, he says, well, the bottom Jewish law line is that we do desecrate Shabbat to save somebody if we have a doubt who they are. But listen to these words. Listen to these harsh words. Only if you know of Jews that do not believe, and they are known to hate religion, and amongst these people that do not believe in God, etc., and hate the religion, amongst these people are those activists and those leaders of the Reform and conservative communities who incite and take Jews away from the true Torah Judaism. And these people, if you see them and there's no issue of hatred. He says, let's say that somebody sees that you're not saving these conservative and reform people, instigators, leaders, whatever. If once they see that, they're going to say, oh, we're not going to save, religious Jews. So if there's a chance that hatred will come out of this, or somebody will see it, they'll badmouth the religious Jews, then you should try to do with all kinds of different, on Shabbat, if you have to do something, you should try to do it with different kinds of changes that you would normally work. We're going to just mention a few of these are questions and answers by the leading sage in America for 40, 50 years, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. We're just going to go over them quick. I totally advise you to check them out. We're in now Yoredea on 101. Yoredea 101. There was a question that someone posed to Rabbi Feinstein in 1967. It says the following: can I rent a room in a conservative school? Allowed to rent a room in a conservative school. And he says the following. He says that, take it from the top here. First question that was asked to him was question 100. They was asking if religious Jews are allowed to go on the federation in Mexico, the Jewish Federation in Mexico, that has conservative and reform representatives on them. And he says the following, that you have to stay away from these people as much as possible, because the conservatives, they deny the principles of Judaism and many of the commandments of the Torah. Most of the rabbis are inciting fellow Jews to believe in their how do we say kfirah, in their non-belief, in their blasphemy. And they desecrate Shabbat and many other sins. Therefore, he says the following: even if the religious institutions will not receive 1 penny, then you're not allowed to join in a group of federation for Jewish education that has these people on them. Even though that the Jewish schools, the religious schools, will suffer, you're not allowed to take 1 penny from them. In another case, there was, this is on 101, there was a case where a person asked if he could be a teacher in he's a teacher in a religious school, and they asked him to be a teacher in a conservative school. So Rav Feinstein says that you're not allowed to do it because the kids will get a message that just like this is a shul, this is a shul, this is the Torah, this is the Torah. You're not allowed to do that. And he goes further. He says, in your letter you mentioned that that perhaps you could rent a place near there. He says you have to be careful because in the Tractate of Idol Worshipping, page 17, it says you have to be very careful of those blasphemy Jews because there's a very serious pull. They have a lot of influence. So he says to stay away from that. Going on here, he says the following. This is in Yoredea 139, Code of Jewish Law of Rav Moshe Feinstein. It says the following. He says, you mentioned in your letter when he asked about being in 2 places, being a teacher in 2 places, conservative and also religious. He says, you mentioned that they shorten their prayers. If you remember, we talked about one of the first things that the Tree of Life synagogue did was shorten their prayers, right? So interesting. So this teacher who was looking for an additional form of making money, who was thinking of taking a job, and his yeshiva said, don't do it, don't take the job. And then he went to Rav Feinstein. Rav Feinstein seconded, don't do it. So listen to this. So he says the following statement, that because of the fact that they do not say the blessings correctly, and they're not praying properly, you are not allowed to answer any of these amen to any of their blessings, and therefore it's forbidden to receive any type of a job into such a place, because of the fact that they go against the Torah, and they could be a bad influence, a bad spiritual influence. So he tells them don't take the job, and also the fact that they changed the prayer book. Rav Feinstein goes on in Orach Chaim, and he says the following in Orach Chaim on question 91. He says the following, that today we have a situation with conservative and reform that they do not have the law. There used to be a law where there were people that would bring Jews, stray them from Judaism, they would be killed. Okay, there was a law that you could kill such a people because they're creating a situation where they're causing the Jewish people to sin. They are bringing Jewish people away from God, from the Torah. So he says it does not apply to them because they might have the law of these babies that were kidnapped at a young age. But that's the only discount that they receive, that you don't go and you don't you don't blow them away. There was once a person, when he became religious, he understood what the Reform and Conservative movement did to him. He went and got a gun, and he went into the office of those people that influenced him in the Reform and Conservative movement, and he opened up fire. So Rav Feinstein is telling us right here that they do not have that law. However, he says very clearly that they have a law that you're not allowed to go in, even if you have a kosher minyan and go in a side room, you're not allowed to go in their buildings. Next, we're on Orach Chaim in Rav Feinstein, 21, question 21. Are you allowed, if there's a banquet for the land of Israel, are you allowed to ask rabbis, Reform and Conservative rabbis, to say a blessing over the bread or over the wine? Are you allowed to do that? He says 100% not. The law is similar to if a non-believer, someone that does not believe in the divinity of Torah, would write a Torah. You are not only allowed to burn it, you are commanded to burn the Torah. But it has God's name 100 times, 500 times. Not interested. If a person that does not believe in the divinity of Torah wrote a Torah scroll, there is a mitzvah to burn that. So therefore the same thing here. He might say a blessing, even if he says it properly. Before we mentioned that the conservatives, they abbreviated and abrupted the services. We're not talking about that. Even if the rabbi, for the sake of the banquet, is going to give a blessing like he's supposed to, you are not allowed to ask him to come up, even though that might cause friction or might cause less donations. And you're not, of course, allowed to answer amen to that. This also is written in Orach Chaim 60, the second volume of Orach Chaim, and questions 49 and 50, the same idea here. So those are some of the sources over here. So unfortunately, just to summarize it, unfortunately, we've seen in this class that those that brought the Jewish people to melt and to assimilate and to be like, and our prayers and our synagogues to become like those of the nations of the world, and do not believe in the divinity of the Torah and in the laws that destroyed an entire generation, generations of Judaism, just like in Germany, the capital of assimilation, Germany, pre-Holocaust times, capital of assimilation. They've destroyed, unfortunately, with a heavy heart, say this to understand the damage that they have done and they continue to do. So we can only say from here to end on a positive note, that can only, with all our heart, to pray that these people recognize that their grave mistake and announce it and come in public, and to their congregants and those activists come in front of the simple people and, you know, say we made a mistake here and it's time to get back to real Judaism, to Torah Judaism. Let us pray that their hearts are able to, we are able to awaken their hearts through our prayers, that Hashem will bring them back to repent.